Hi, everybody. Um, my name is Josh Barone, and I'm with the business team at Eagle Point Funding. We're going to take a start here of a broad overview. But I think one of the first things we want to address is what is this opportunity called federal funding? How large is this opportunity, and how do the opportunities work? And we're going to cover that as well as some of the different mechanisms. So first and foremost, kind of take a moment and think about how much money is actually available when it comes to federal funding. I think the answer might surprise many of you. Asha, you can go to the next slide. The federal budget anticipated for fiscal year 2021 is $142.2 billion. Now, that's actually a little bit of a drop off of what was there last year at $160 billion. And the final numbers haven't been decided. The federal budget is announced in usually February or March. But with that said, you should know that usually what happens is they start with a smaller budget and they increase it. But in any regard, any sense, $142.2 billion is a fantastic amount of money. And it goes to a number of different sources, one being the federal research labs themselves. Academia, we know, is highly funded by federal funds. And then there's a chunk in the middle, and on the chart, it's marked in red, that goes to the private sector, and that's between $30 to $60 billion annually. But it's not just about the funding, it's about the quality of the funding. Yeah, $60 billion is a tremendous amount of money, no matter how you look at it, and it's more than probably all the VCs in America annually. But when you look at the quality of the money, it's a different story. We're talking about what's called non-dilutive funding, meaning that there's no effect on your bottom line of your business. The federal government isn't interested in taking equity, and it's not interested in exerting influence. You get to keep your IP, and in fact, it might lead to a federal client at the end of the day, fall on contracts. But it's a stable source that is there every single year. Which doesn't have the same business aims that is available in venture capital. Now, that's not to take away anything that's that's out there as far as in private sector investments. Those are very necessary. Federal funding can complement it in a very powerful way with this no equity approach. And it goes beyond that. When you get federally funded, what you're essentially getting is something, a stamp of approval, which goes beyond the money that you get initially in the grant. And by the way, that could be a substantial amount of money. We'll cover the amounts shortly. But that money that you get also comes with a seal of approval. And that can be used in future for netting customers, saying, I've been backed by NASA, I've been backed by the National Science Foundation or the Department of Defense. And you can also use that with your future fundraise. And this is an interesting study that was done by the Milken Institute, where they found that companies got more than eightfold what they received in federal investments in private sector funding in the years following an R&D grant from the federal government. As far as which industries are relevant for federal funding, it's less about the industries and it's more about the quality of the technology. If you have high quality technology and you're not in a very, very niche sector, then chances are there are not just one federal funding opportunity out there for you, but there are many. And this is true whether you have some sort of defense application, which we know, by the way, defense today is more supply chain or cybersecurity or AI or big data than anything else, and whether it's energy, or whether it is advanced materials or VR, AR, you name it, there is likely going to be a large number of opportunities available for you, assuming you're developing innovative technology, as opposed to, let's say, something a little bit less innovative. And that's why, there are thousands and thousands of companies that have been federal funded, and there are thousands that get funded every single year. Some of them might surprise you because we think of them as these leaders, these giants. But the truth is that they also had an early beginning, and they were able to use federal funding to really boost their companies, such as Lyft Labs or Symantec, Qualcomm. We've all heard of these companies. And not that you have to be the next internet or GPS or Siri to get funded, but it's good to know you're in good company if you get federally funded, because that's where these early programs got their start. I don't know if you guys remember, but a couple of years ago when Al Gore was running for president, he made a statement that he had something to do connecting him to the internet. Maybe he had created the internet. I think what he was referring to was that he was instrumental in funding a program that led to what was called the DARPANET, or later on the intranet, which was actually federally funded program that led to what we know today is the internet. So pretty amazing. You're being a great company, but of course you don't have to be the next internet in order to get funded. The big question is why? Why does the federal government do this? It's non-dilutive funding. It's crazy amounts of money. Why would the federal government put such instruments in place and such amazing amounts of funding in place? And there are two primary reasons why the federal government makes that investment. The most common of which is the federal government uses federal funding to seek out solutions to government and agency challenges. They have a need and they're looking to innovative businesses like yourselves to come to them and to offer to solve pain points that they're experiencing. This is why we call this dual use technology, because it's technology which has application in the commercial sector, the standard market, as well as in the federal market. So let's take a look just for a second at what that looks like. So the federal agency, let's take the DoD, is looking for some sort of solution to a DoD problem. And they post an opportunity which is related to it, and offering to give R&D funding for a small business. Then they learn through the solicitation process about the different potential solutions that are out there. They make an investment. Then they see how that investment, which is an investment in our research and development capabilities, and they see how the company performs. And then if you've performed well, and the need has not been fulfilled from another source, then the federal government has the opportunity, or will ask for the opportunity, to become your early adopter or an early customer for this new technology that has been developed. The second reason that the federal government makes these types of investments is because there is a beautiful lesson in economics here. The federal government knows that a couple things come out as a result of making an investment. Ashley, can you go to the next slide? The first are altruistic. The federal government makes an investment in your company and is essentially stimulating your growth. But the government is also stimulating the growth of great technology, which is going to be there to better society. But there's also the aspect of job creation. But then there's a capitalistic motive here. This is in the way of trickle-down economics, where the federal government invests in industry. Industry build businesses, which pay taxes like any other business. And as the business gets bigger, employs more employees, and has more interactions, both locally as well as globally, then the federal government reaps the benefits in the form of taxes. And the return on its investments is about $2.30 for every dollar that they invest in businesses. So I saw one of the questions that already popped up was, are we going to talk about SBIR and STTR? Well, yes, we're going to talk more about SBIR than STTR, but they're two different programs. They're both geared for small businesses, and they offer phased funding. Now, in order to be eligible for a small business program, you need to be what the Small Business Administration considers a small business. Namely, 3 criteria need to be met. Your company needs to be under 500 employees, which isn't particularly small, but and most companies are much smaller than that in the small business programs. But again, need to be less than 500 employees. The research and development that your company is conducting needs to be performed within the United States, and 51% or more of your ownership needs to be in the hands of US residents or citizens in order to be eligible for a small business innovation research program. Phase ones, again, this is a phase program, range in amount depending on the program from between $50,000 to $250,000. This is supposed to be an initial investment to see how you perform. Mostly it's performance based on how you're going to do in a pilot project to get from idea to POC. And that doesn't mean it's a totally new technology. It could be in a more mature state, but a POC as far as this research experiment or this research period is going to be. And then once you have been successful, you apply for a phase two, which means you've reached your milestone, you apply for a phase two, and then the follow-on funding is more substantial. It could be anywhere between $750,000 to more than $1.5 million. The phase 2B is there for commercialization assistance, and a phase 3 is often a contract with the same agency that funded you. Now, SBIR is there. That's a Small Business Innovation Research Grants, is a small portion of the budget. It's about 3.2% of all larger agencies. They have to allocate at least that amount to small businesses. Most opportunities are out there and available for small businesses as well as to large businesses. What's nice about the SBIR program is it has preferential treatment given to small businesses, and even more special preferential treatment given to small businesses that are owned by minorities, by female-owned ventures, as well as veteran-owned ventures. The STTR program, which we're not going to spend too much time talking about, is 0.4% of that same budget for the larger budgeted organizations. And it's there for small businesses to have a relationship, an R&D relationship with an academic center or with a nonprofit research organization. And that's also an interesting program, and it has quite a large amount of funding as well. Don't let the 3.2 and 0.4% fool you. Collectively, it's close to $4 billion, where the blue is the broad agency announcements, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Broad agency announcements are continuous funding. They, as opposed to the phase funding of the SBIR program, they typically run for research periods of 2 to 5 years, depending on what you're developing. Obviously, for software products, that period is much shorter. And these projects tend to have higher award ceilings. So if in an SBIR, we talked about funding that ranges between $50,000 to $1.6 million. Well, here the award ceiling could be in the tens of millions of dollars. The topics tend to be broad, hence the name broad agency announcement. And really, it's an opportunity to go after more long-term and more substantial funding, though the SBIR is a very impactful program as well. What do grants actually cover? Well, they cover everything that is related to research and development costs, and that includes salaries, subcontractors. Let's take a hardware company that has a software component. Maybe they're not doing the software, maybe a subcontractor is doing it, and that's fine. Instruments, materials, which could be also computers or other materials that you need to purchase for the employees on the R&D side. Facilities and admin costs, which include, the rent that you pay, and the admin professionals that you have on staff, advisors, as well as up to a 7% profit, which is built in. So this means roughly, if you had a $1 million grant, then $70,000 of that $1 million can be used for whatever cost that you want to, whether it's something which is related to, an HR event for your company or for hiring a sales team.
All right, Josh, I think I'm going to pick it up from here. So to dive into grant writing, part one is, am I eligible? Josh very eloquently explained small business innovation research grants. The eligibility rests upon three main topics. One, does your company have less than 500 employees? Two, is the research and development done in the US? And three, is the either venture capital ownership or private ownership 51% US resident owned? Essentially, if the answers to those questions are you have less than 500 employees, you have the research and development, at least the component that you're applying to a grant for in the US, and 51% of the company is US resident owned, you are eligible for SBIRs. In terms of broad agency announcement eligibility, it depends on the agency. They could range, and there's a lot of different, what makes broad agency announcements so interesting is there's a lot of different formats for them available. So it's not cut and dry, it's a little bit less standardized. So unlike the SBIR system, which has clear phases, broad agency announcements could have phases. They could have just a one kind of application and that's it. And there's a lot of different setups along the way. It really depends on the agency. So a few critical registrations we are going to talk about today. The Department of Energy uses PAMS, which stands for Portfolio Analysis and Management System. They use this to manage and track the grant applications. And that is if you're working with the Department of Energy. The next system, which is more widely used, is SAM, the System for Award Management. It's used to work with agencies and governments up to the award. This registration is the one you should start with. So if you have, time tomorrow and you want to get started on a grant application, right? SAM should be your first registration. It should be your go-to. That's where you get your start. CAGE basically is the system that allows you to receive federal funding. It shows that you're eligible to work with the government. One thing you should know about CAGE codes is they are meticulous sometimes. So if you misspelled, not misspelled even, but let's say your company name is lowercase in one piece of government documentation and uppercase in another, it could cause a problem with the CAGE code. So you should give yourself some time to work with it and make sure that the process goes through smoothly. Your DUNS is how the government tracks how the money is allocated. In addition, the companies need, all companies have tax identification numbers or IANs, and you will need that if you win an award. These registrations as a whole, they're not difficult, but they are arduous, meaning that you should set aside time and get going on them in order to give yourself enough time and make sure that you're able to submit properly and be on top of the deadlines. A lot of these systems sometimes don't necessarily work the way you want them to when you want them to. So it's good to give yourself a lot of time ahead of time to work through. Let's say there's a misspelling. Let's say there was a mistake. Just being able to work through those issues and not be in a time stress is very, very important. The next part after registration is identifying the right opportunities. So a lot of people ask us, hey, where do you guys find the grants? How does Eagle Point Funding find the opportunities? The annoying answer for it is we do the research, right? We spend time, we comb the websites, we comb the 475-page solicitations, and we're always on the lookout for our clients. During the Q&A, we're more than happy to share a few of these websites. One significant one is SBIR.gov. And on that website, you can not only see current solicitations, and it has a really nice timeline of what solicitations are going to be available for SBIR, but it also shows award data for previous awards. So you can understand what kind of competitors you have in your field and how to work around them. But aside from the research, you should really read cover to cover and make sure you understand what they're looking for and how they're looking for it, because a misunderstanding here could cost you many, many hours of putting an application together for something that might not necessarily fit what you're looking for. Lastly, in terms of contacting program directors, for SBIR, the program directors aren't necessarily crazy, let's say helpful initially. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. It goes case to case. That being said, it never hurts to try to contact them. Um, but in terms of broad agency announcements, a lot of the program directors expect you to be in touch with them, and it gives you a good framework for working with them in the future. So in general, it's a really good idea to at least give it a shot. They won't always answer, but it makes a lot of sense to try. Because again, you won't get it if you don't try for it. In terms of targeting the right opportunities, it doesn't necessarily make sense to apply. So for a lot of these grants, there are open topics, meaning that they're aware of how many opportunities they're not aware of, right? So the Air Force knows about what technology they already do have. Um, they are also aware of what technology they are not aware of and what they don't have. That being said, when you are making up these applications, you should try to be in line with the agency. So if you're applying to an open topic, it has to be at least relevant to that agency, and it needs to make sense, and you need to create a strong story. How many to apply to? In terms of that, the answer is as many as are relevant and as you are capable of, because simple mathematics states that if you apply to 10 opportunities and you're going to have a 30% success rate, 10 opportunities, you're going to see 3 wins. That's significant, but if you apply to 1 opportunity, you have 1/3 chance of winning. That's not necessarily fun. So again, applying to as many as possible is critical. And in addition, the more you apply to, the more these government agencies see you and understand what you're doing. And in a way, it's almost business development in itself by just applying, because you might not necessarily always win, but bringing attention to your company and bringing attention to your technology is a win in itself, increasing that exposure. Um, Understanding and planning for deadlines, we kind of touched on it when we talked about registration, but it is critical to give yourself time. Um, Many of the agencies claim that they do not judge you based off of when you submit. The exclusion to that is AFWorks, the Air Force's technology accelerator. They have said that statistically speaking, the people who submit earlier tend to have a higher percent chance of winning. So being on top of those deadlines, understanding those deadlines, and being able to work within them is crucial. It can't be stressed enough that on top of that, you want to give yourself leeway. You do not want to have a situation where the system goes down because of it's overloaded and you're not able to submit in time. Sometimes they'll extend the deadline for those situations. Sometimes they won't. And it's a shame because putting these submissions together, sometimes they're not necessarily the simplest things. So it's good to be on top of it and treat it seriously and understand your deadlines. Lastly, business to government versus research and development only. So a lot of these grants are a mechanism in themselves to get business to government contracts. What they are is because of the phases within the SBIR system, these agencies are allowed to see your company grow. So they're able to see, hey, what are you putting together in a proposal? What are you showing us? And you get a phase 1, right? And then they get to see, hey, 6 months later, they get to see your phase 2 and how you moved along with your proposal, how you allocated the funds, and how you grew. If they're impressed, they're able to say, hey, that's a great company to start a contract with. Let's go ahead. Or they could say, oh, hey, this was underperforming. This doesn't necessarily make sense. But there are business to government contracts as part of some of these solicitations. In addition to that, there on the flip side are like what Josh talked about in terms of altruistic agencies. Altruistic agencies aren't necessarily looking at it for themselves. So the National Science Foundation, from the companies that I've worked with so far, have not awarded a contract. But that being said, they're very interested in growing these companies in the name of A, science, and B, the economy. And so there's still benefits to be made from R&D. But that being said, there are certain solicitations and opportunities that are more geared towards business to government. Okay, the next thing is that when you build a budget and business plan, you have to be logical, right? Because they're going to be monitoring it. They see, if you say, hey, my proof of concept is I am going to capture lightning in a bottle, right? And they say, okay, sure, we'll give you a grant for that proof of concept, but then the phase 2 needs to be a prototype of lightning in a bottle. And if you cannot provide that, they're not necessarily going to grant you that phase 2, right? So you have to be logical. You have to understand the market. You have to speak to the agency that you're applying to. It needs to make sense for them. And so not every agency has the same people. The person who's sitting behind the desk reading your proposal in the Army is very different than the person sitting behind a desk reading your proposal at NASA. So it's crucial to speak to them. You want to tell the story of your technology. So like I was just saying, which audience and agency are you speaking to? And how technical do you want to be? How simple do you want to be? It's a balance. You have to really highlight the pain point that you are solving, and as well as what your tech is unique and how it's unique and how it's different from what they've seen before. Because again, you're not the only company to applying to these things. So there has to be a serious story being told. And the better you're able to tell that story, the better off you are. It's not necessarily always about having the best technical aspects. A lot of the times, if you have the best technology in the world, but you're not able to tell the story of that technology, it doesn't do much good because the person behind the desk at the Army can't understand it, right? So it's crucial to be able to understand your audience and put it into words that your audience will understand. Lastly, alignment and fit. So basically, it has to align with the agency's funding opportunity. It can't just be, hey, this was an open topic and we decided to apply our gravel technology to the Air Force. Rather, it has to make sense. We're applying our gravel technology to the Air Force because this can improve your runway efficiency 20%. In addition, it needs to communicate with the organization's experience with these types of projects. So if they don't necessarily understand it, like I said before, it's crucial to make sure that they understand it and how it works. And one way of doing this is including concise anecdotes illustrating the need for the technology. And that's one of the best ways. I know I said storytelling a few times already, but telling the story of your technology in a way that is understandable by all is the name of the game. Some people said it in my last, in general, some of the best lawyers are the lawyers that are able to make a contract that a 5-year-old can understand. So for grants, that's not necessarily always true, but it's a good rule of thumb when it comes to having these contracts and solicitations. If you can have a layperson understand it, there's some chances in certain contexts that it can really help by having these illustrations of anecdotes and the needs. Okay, so in the worst case scenario, what happens if your proposal gets rejected, right? There's 2 ways you could take it. You could either take it as, hey, this is annoying, the system's rigged, I don't want to do this anymore, or you can incorporate the changes in the recommendations and apply again and apply to new opportunities. Because usually with proposals that don't necessarily get accepted, there's usually feedback given by the project manager. And you could take that feedback, and again, if they're able to see improvement in what you're doing and put it the right way, it's very, very possible to brush yourself off and get there again. Just a side little anecdote, I was speaking to a company recently, and their proposal was rejected due to the fact that the grant writer they were using, which wasn't us, by the way, but the grant writer they were using put a line in the application that said that this company is not focused on commercialization, which is very problematic for the agency because they want to boost the economy with these grants. So if the company is not focused on commercialization, it's a no-go. And so when they got their proposal rejected, the company that I was speaking to went back to the project manager, found out, and they said the project manager told them, if you took that line out, you would have won. So now they know for the next grant that they apply to, hey, we just need to take this line out. We need to fix that. Maybe not have the same grant writer just to avoid the mistake, but we can work from there. it's important to understand that this isn't a sprint, as the slide says. It's a marathon. So with each application you do, you get closer and closer, and you get more and more recognition. So it's crucial to take that and to get that recognition. And even if it doesn't necessarily work immediately, over time you'll learn the system, you'll understand the system, and be able to really take it from there. Okay, so now we are going to pivot from talking about exactly how to write a grant to some of the opportunities. I know I mentioned business to government. On the screen are a few opportunities that have serious business to government programs. And essentially what business to government really means is that these agencies are looking at your tech in a very greedy manner. They're looking at it to use it for themselves. And there's been some really significant opportunities. The DIU recently had a very, very cool cyber security solicitation available for OT and IT, which was great. And AFWorks has been running an amazing program with pitch days. We're actually about to talk a little bit about their open topic. They're a community of Air Force innovators who strive to connect airmen to solutions across the force. And so basically they're looking to take what's available from the private sector and integrate it into the Air Force. Because what's happened recently is there's a lot of legacy systems that they have that they know that need modernization, or they know there's something better out there. They just don't know what it is yet. And so that's what they're allowing for the open topic, to find technologies that could to help them with the need. This next slide, we're going to dive a little bit into how the phase process works. So it was like Josh was saying earlier. Phase one is usually a feasibility study, so proof of concept, if you will. Phase two is a prototype or a solution trial with the Air Force. And lastly, phase three is a sole source government purchase, or better known as a B2G contract. So essentially, this is really how this kind of opportunity looks when it comes to putting this together in order for B2G contracts. On the other side of it, there are agencies that do it simply for the R&D funding. To talk a little bit more about the open topic, there are two different tracks for this program. One of the highlights for it, though, before I get into the two tracks, is the funding within 60 days. So this is fast funding. A lot of the other agencies have, there's a lot of different timelines out there, but we're looking anywhere from 30 to 60 days, from 3 to 5 months. So AFWorks has, for phase one, there's usually the first track, which is phase one, phase two, and a classic phase three. For phase one, it's a proof of concept. Phase two, working prototype, and then phase three is a follow-along contract. The phase one is usually around $50,000. Phase two is $750,000 to $1.5 million. And phase three could be the commercialization assistance starting at $3 million. If you have a memorandum of understanding from an Air Force stakeholder, you could go directly to phase two and skip on to phase two. And essentially, this will allow you to get past that phase one and get directly into a little bit of the meatier parts. To talk a little bit about Eagle Point, some of our winners, I'll give you guys a second to read. But basically, a lot of them, AFWorks has been pivotal, because what has happened is that they've led the way in making funding more accessible and more reasonable, which has caused other Army and Navy and other agencies to start being a little bit faster about their funding, and allowing for a little bit more of a flexible kind of feel to the old school federal funding system, which has been fantastic. In addition to that, there are pitch days and hackathons that have been hosted by AFWorks that allow for companies to, again, gain that exposure and to, break through some of the slow pace. They're breaking through it with these new kind of initiatives. Okay, so the three major criteria to win, I think we went over them a little bit when we talked about how to write a grant, but this is crucial. There needs to be innovative technology. There needs to be a strong R&D team. There needs to be commercially viable technology. So in terms of innovative technology, they they don't want a copy of something that's already out there and that's been streamlined and used by everyone. They do want that lightning in a bottle. In terms of an R&D team, they like seeing engineers on the team, and they don't necessarily want to bachelor degree holders in a garage necessarily. Let's say they want to see an engineering team. They want to see research and development done. This is research and development funding. So despite that there is a lot of technologies that have come from humble beginnings, the federal government likes seeing some real heavy hitters on the team usually. And commercially viable, I touched on it briefly before. In terms of commercial viability, they are funding this technology in order that it benefits themselves, but also the economy. That's really the end goal. So if it's a very niche use case that's only Army or Air Force applicable, or let's say let's get out of the box. We've been talking about the DoD for a while. Let's say NASA applicable, so it's only space but not a private space kind of technology. Then they're not going to be as interested as if there's real commercial compatibility. So here's our keys to winning federal grants. You have to understand the system. So like we talked about phase one, reading through the different solicitations and really understanding how those look and how those work, finding and applying to multiple funding opportunities. So it's not about, hey, I'm going to put all my eggs in the NASA basket and hope it works out. Let's find out in 3 months when they tell me. No, it's being active, being proactive, and finding what's available. Lastly, it's like we said earlier, writing and telling the story of your tech in a concise and compelling manner. So having a way of describing your tech that's understandable, clear, concise, and persuasive. You want to persuade them that they need this. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about our newest initiative. Equal Point Funding is it's been a grant writing consultancy. And so now we're working on a ecosystem in order to help companies that have already won federal funding. What happens is that a lot of the times after companies have won federal funding, there is a plateau. And what that plateau is, hey, what do we do now? We got federal funding. That was our big project. Do we look for investors? Do we talk to large corporates? Do we work with industry partners, et cetera? So Eagle Point Funding is working on for a solve for that, both for our clients and for it's open to SBIR winners as well. But basically, we're creating an ecosystem around 4 annual pitch events that will allow for us to, first of all, have those pitch events. So give exposure to these companies that have somewhat plateaued, but also that need to get to the next level. And also, aside from the pitch events, we create introductions between companies, investors, federal agencies, and corporate stakeholders. And what this does is it creates a matchmaking system where everyone in the ecosystem already knows that the companies in our ecosystem have already won federal funding. And the investors understand that, the large corporates understand that, the federal agencies understand that. And that's kind of the way for them to network and create a really meaningful relationships that should help bolster their company. You could feel free to book a call with me to talk a little bit more about Deep Tech Showcase. It's a really, really cool initiative. And so I kind of got ahead of myself, but 3 pitch events annually at this point, because we already had the winter one. There are multiple sessions at each pitch event. And in between the pitch event, we are going to be sharing. So we're acting as a matchmaker for companies and investors. And so far, we've already set up a lot of really, really, really interesting introductions within the ecosystem that have already started to bear fruit for the companies that are in the Deep Tech Showcase. So a little bit more about Eagle Point Funding. We are a world leader in accessing non-dilutive funding from US federal agencies. We do not work within the life sciences because our sister company, Freemind Group, works within the life sciences. Our Gentum Group works for EU funding, and our other sister company, Deep Tech Showcase, is, again, as I said earlier, but we are strongly in the tech and defense sector. So anything related to technology or defense applications, we are the ones to speak to. Um, so the group was established in 1999. At this point, we've already won $1.6 billion in awards in federal research and development, 500 plus clients annually, and we have a lot of in-house teams working on these solicitations. Essentially, what we're doing is we're specializing in this area, so that that we're not, spending our time thinking about other things. Our bread and butter is research and development grants, so we understand them and we know how to work with them. So what to expect once partnering with us? So if you decide to book a call with us, right? The first thing is a discovery call. Basically get a better idea of your tech, see if it really is lightning in a bottle. The next call is usually with one of our experts. After that, our grant writing team takes a look at every single company we talk to and checks whether or not it makes sense to work with them. So they run numbers on their end. They say, hey, is this company, is there a lot of funding available for this company? Is there enough funding that we can make it worthwhile for us? What's available? How would it look? And how would we work within it? So once you pass through the professional department, what we'll do is we'll put together a contract if everyone signs. Then we'll get to the kickoff call. The kickoff call is 24 to 72 hours after signing the contract. Essentially, what it is building a roadmap for what grants you're going to be tackling and looking at. Because what's important to know is, like we said earlier, finding the right solicitations and having a strategy to submit to them in a timely manner. The time involvement that we usually see is that for the first submission, it's the longest because we're still getting to know your company is still getting to know us. We're working, we're syncing up. Second submission is a lot less time involved. And then every submission after the second one is very, very, very smooth relative to the first two. So this is why we do 5 to 10 submissions over a 9-month-long engagement, because this allows us to use our skills in the best manner possible. Because if we were to do one-off engagements, it wouldn't necessarily make sense, one, to do the analysis on our end to make sure that your company makes sense to do this, but two, also to learn and understand your company, it makes sense to have a longer engagement and to work for a certain period of time so you maximize the opportunities available. Okay, let's talk. I'm going to open up the floor for Q&A. And yeah, don't be shy. Feel free to ask any questions. I will answer them to the best of my ability.
So actually, we had a number of questions that appeared in the chat. So just to quickly rehash a couple of the questions, we had a question about how long does or how does the programs usually work? How long does it take for a prototype, et cetera? I just want to take a zoom out look for just a short period of time. Oh, and I see there's some other questions coming in. When it comes to federal funding, the time to funding it's pretty similar to what you see in the venture world, where you make your first connection, you've pitched, you've agreed on a timeline, and you receive funding within between 60 days, I'd say, so to 2 months to about 4 to 5 months from submission. That's pretty common. Question from Sarankath. About our business model. Our business model is based on a multi-submission approach. So we don't work with companies off one-offs where you apply to a single submission, but rather we work with companies to apply to at least 5 submissions over the course of an initial getting to know you period of 9 months. For that, we have a consultancy fee as well as a success fee. So it's not all weighted to one end or the other. The consultancy fee is $46,000 for those 9 months, and 5% of every award is the success fee. Venkat asks about the SBIR process and different agencies. Yes, absolutely. There are SBIR programs for pretty much every opportunity for every agency that has more than $100 million of R&D funding, which is a lot of them. Does Eagle Point Funding work with nonprofits? Yes, we do. In the event that they are doing R&D, and we're happy to work with them as long as it's, it's not a very niche area of R&D. Hal asks about Deep Tech Showcase. The best way to find information about Deep Tech Showcase is to send Asher an email. Same email here, except for asher@deeptechshowcase.com. Taylor, you got it right. The first couple submissions are the most time consuming on your end. By the third application, I mean, it depends on, if you change your R&D drastically, then, it's the same challenge to get to know you. But once we get to know you and your core technology, yes, then putting in an average of 10 hours or something similar would be commonplace. So great question about when you say that R&D has to be in the US, does that extend to the broad agency announcements? So broad agency announcements, it's a great question, are often open for non-US based companies as well as US based companies that do R&D abroad. So it depends on the actual BAA because each one has a little bit of a different stipulation. But yeah, there are plenty of opportunities within BAAs that allow you to get funding even though your R&D is not domestic. In fact, there are plenty of opportunities for non-US based companies to get R&D funding. The caveat usually with the case of if you're a foreign company, not that this was your question, but I'll answer it anyways. The caveat, if you're a non-US based company, your technology needs to be more advanced or more, I'd say, innovative than what's domestically available. There's a question here about BAAs, but I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think it's industry specific. In terms of industry specific questions, feel free to set up a call with us. I know that the QR code might not be working right now, but I will send everyone a link. I can actually pull one up. I'll pull one up right now so that you can set up a call for the industry specific questions you might have.
Okay, so we have some more more questions. Does Eagle Point Funding work with undergraduate and graduate lead companies based in university accelerators? It depends on the program. It depends on what you're developing, and also if we're a paid service. So if you have some sort of basic funding and you're able to afford our services, and the technology is deep tech, and you check the primary boxes, making you a likely winner, then happy to work with you. We have a question here from Ed. What if your R&D team is working from the cloud? Yeah, that doesn't matter. It's not about where they're physically located, and even if they live in the cloud, but rather whether or not they are based internationally. That's for SBIRs, but for broad agency announcements, it depends on the program, but there are many programs that are open. Thank you very much for the compliments. There's a question here about how the agencies work. What if they have 10 proposals to fund, but they only have money for fewer, or something to that effect? Well, they can work within their budget, and if they like the companies, they can stay in contact with them and fund them at a later stage. And in fact, that's what a couple of the agencies do. Well, they like the company, they'll say, we'd love to work with you, but we don't have the funding right now. And then they'll be in touch with them in the next round. I think we answered all questions. Asher, are we good?
stay on for a couple more minutes. If there's anyone who has any last minute questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. But I posted the link to set up a quick call with us in the chat. Feel free to set it up. And looking forward to speaking to individuals on a case by case basis to talk a little bit more about the situations that they've had or that they're experiencing, and we're more than happy to be there and help out where we can. No problem. So Frank, and to utilize foreign contractors, if that is the case, basically for broad agency announcements, short answer, international allowed broad agency announcements, yes. For SBIRs, you're not allowed to use the funding to pay for foreign contractors. So basically, if you have a full US team for that project, you should have the US team working on it. Because remember, you're applying to these opportunities in order to get R&D funding, research and development funding, which could include salaries. So they want you to be using a US team for the project that you are submitting for. Let me know if that was not clear. All right, if that's the last question, I'll give another minute, but thank you everyone for joining us. It was a pleasure. Again, feel free to join to set up a time to speak with me through Calendly that I posted in the chat. And yeah, feel free to reach out with any other questions. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.